My name's Cameron, and this is my PhD project car. I intended for this video to kind of show my journey as somebody who knew about cars, but had never really worked on their own project and was just going in completely blind of what it entails and what you can end up with. And I'm really happy with where the car is. It is fun as hell to drive. I come from an automotive family. My uncle builds race boats, restores them, and he used to race stock cars when he was younger. My dad had a bunch of junkers that he bought. He had a Z28 Camaro, a 73 Mustang, as well as a Jeep J20. And those cars he bought purely because he wanted to be able to learn about them and better understand how they worked. Not really to flip them and make money, and to be honest, he never made any money off of them anyway. Right when the pandemic started, COVID happened. I worked in a molecular biology lab working on my PhD. And those studies require bench work, and the lab spaces are quite small. So I decided, given that we were required to work in shifts, that there was no time better than the present to try to build something. So I happened to track down a Craigslist post from a guy, and the Craigslist post had a picture of him in the car with the news ticker below it. And on the news ticker, it said, "First man to cross this new bridge," right? So the guy advertised in his Craigslist ad that the CRX was famous as one of the selling points. That was really great. But I ended up getting hold of the CRX from him. I actually had my brother go out and look at it first and test drive it for me because I was in Pullman. The car was drivable, but I was nervous as it was winter time when I received the car. And I didn't want to have to try to drive it over the pass, because there is a pass between Seattle and Pullman, and a car like this on old tires with an unknown history, it just didn't make sense to me to try to make that drive. I figured I'd probably pay more in towing when it didn't make the drive than I would to just try to have it transported. So I contacted a transport company. When I contacted them, they told me at 11 in the morning, "Oh, we'll work on it and see what we can find." And I get a phone call from my brother at 3 p.m. the same day that there's somebody with a very thick Russian accent outside of his door. He's got it dually parked with a wedge-style trailer that's already got another car on it, and he's asking to put my car on it. And while I'm on the phone with him, and he's like, "I don't know if this is legitimate," I get a call from the transport company that says, "Your transport is there," without them even, they didn't contact me beforehand. So I called my brother, I confirmed the correct information, the guy threw it on there, and I had the car the same day as I ordered transport. By like 8 or 9 p.m., guy pulled over. I ended up paying him $500 to have it done, which from everybody I've talked to is an absolute steal. But I guess winter is the off season. So I really wanted to go with a B series motor initially, something like a Type R motor or a GSR for this, because they can make 180 horsepower, which is really good for this car, especially when it weighs nothing with me in it. So I thought about that, and then there was always the K series option. And nowadays I feel like you don't see as many posts that are relevant to like present day, because Honda Tech forums are all old, but nearly everybody on the Honda Tech forums or Grassroots Motorsports or any of the forums that I looked at argued that K-swap was for rich people and that B-swap was the way to go. And while I was looking on Facebook Marketplace at engines, I didn't think that there was really that much of a difference in price between buying a B-series engine and a K-series engine, especially if you're buying them independently. And me not ever doing a project like this, I didn't really know whether or not I was going to be getting something that was like torched, right? Or something that had some serious problem. And ultimately, when you're buying an engine standalone on Facebook Marketplace, especially when there's not a video of the engine in the car, you don't really know if you're getting what you thought you were getting. So I came to the conclusion that my best bet was going to be to try to find a running RSX Type S. And as I was looking on Facebook Marketplace, I happened to find a running RSX Type S 7 miles away in Moscow, Idaho. I went and checked, make sure that the engine was correct, engine and transmission, took it on a test drive. She was very forward with, the wheels and tires are pretty old. Tires definitely need to be replaced. There's a little bit of a grind in third, but you don't have any issues if you put the clutch all the way down. Just if you're lazy, then it can be hard to get it in third, which from what I've been told is really common with the 6-speed RSX trans. Additionally, when I was talking to these folks, they were super nice. She even told me the car had a name. The car was named Cherry Bomb. And she kept telling me over, have you thought of a name for the car? Have you decided what you want to call it? You can change the name. You don't need to keep it Cherry Bomb. And after talking to my dad on the phone, he told me I should have told her that I wanted to name it Salvage because that's where it was going to go. But couldn't break her heart. She was driving her way to Minnesota, was ready to move on with her life. I said, okay. She said, I'm selling it for $3,500, and I agreed to that, especially since I would much rather pay more money knowing that the car was running and driving with the initial plan of just taking the motor out and putting it in the CRX. And I know now especially that there's a lot more to it than that, but that was my initial plan. Put a motor in that has high mileage, have some fun. So got the car home, decided that one of the first things I would do is compression test it. And when I went to compression test the motor, it wasn't great, I will say. Cylinders 1 and 4 were around 180 PSI, which is pretty common for an RSX Type S. Cylinders 2 and 3, however, were around 80 to 90 PSI. I decided that maybe I should just have it rebuilt. And I look back on that decision, and I know that to get the car where it is now, to be happy with where it is now, that I made the right decision. However, it would have been really nice to drive the CRX with it not having the most power initially, just to have some fun, instead of taking on a project that requires so much work to get it running. But nevertheless, I still took the engine, took it up to Spokane to Gibson Performance Engines. I had them build the rotating assembly. So they did all of the clearances for rotating assembly, decked the block, redid the head, did everything for me. I had them put Molnar rods and Wiseco pistons, and then additionally I put a Drag Cartel 2.2 endurance cam and Supertech valve train in this car. I ordered parts for the trans as well. I ordered a Synchrotech carbon synchro set, and did the whole I might as well, and decided to put a helical LSD from M Factory in here as well. And I've come to find throughout this project that it's really easy to fall into the might as well category, and you'll see as I go through these parts that there's a lot of might as well that happened on this car to get it to where it is now. So I ordered those parts. I was told by Gibson Performance Engines that because it was summer, dropped the engine block off in April after I was able to pull it out of the RSX, that it would take anywhere between July and August, so 3 to 4 months for them to get it done, especially with COVID and difficulty in getting all the parts. I also ended up with a much larger piston bore. I think these are 87.25 instead of the original 86. Not because they had to, but because those were the only pistons that were available at 11 to 1 compression. So they were putting this together, and while they were putting it together, I pulled the CRX engine second. And as I was driving the CRX during the day into the garage, I could see that there was just a billow of white smoke coming out of it. So I knew that the engine was not healthy, and that it wasn't going to do me any good to try to make some money off of it. Those D15 B2 engines are not really worth very much, and the transmissions aren't worth very much, especially if it's kind of unknown, doesn't really function very well. So I took the CRX motor out with trans, and then I took the entire exhaust apart, which had holes rusted in it. No rust on the actual chassis, but the holes rusted through the exhaust. And I took catalytic converter, took everything, and brought it down to the nearest salvage yard, as well as any of the odds and ends from the RSX that I didn't think I'd need, down to the salvage yard. Made $100. And then I took the RSX chassis, and I called a guy who was on Facebook Marketplace. First, I called a bunch of salvage yards, and all of them were like, if you bring it here, we can give you this, but we can't transport it here. And eventually I talked to one of them, and I said, I am incapable of transporting this. I don't have a car that can transport transport it, and it's not worth the money to me to transport it, right? I'd much rather have somebody else transport it for me. So they directed me to a local guy, called him, paid him 25 bucks, signed the title over to him, and he just took it down and had it crushed. There weren't a lot of great parts in the car anyway. Couldn't sell any of the body panels because they were all dented. So it was the best choice for me for sure. Knowing that the RSX was scrapped, I had a CRX shell, and I had the RSX motor kind of impending, I started ordering parts. And as I was ordering parts, I decided that I was going to do something stupid that I don't regret doing because it looks fine, but it was definitely more than I bargained for, and that was shave the engine bay. I had never painted before, never sanded anything, never welded. I had never done any of these things, and I just told myself, like, this car is my educational opportunity, so I'm gonna do it. And so I went and bought a MIG welder from Harbor Freight, one of the ones that's gas wire-fed MIG. I think it's back here. I think it's MIG 140. I don't think they make this one anymore. I think they only have the 170, but it's MIG 140. So I decided, I'll teach myself how to weld. I decided as far as paint goes in bodywork that most of the YouTube videos I could see online use metal glaze, so I got that from Evercoat. And then I ordered paint that was Phantom Pearl Gray, which is an OEM Honda color. And eventually I'll probably paint the whole car the same color once I get to that. But I decided that I was going to try to shave it, and I did it the longest way possible by removing all of the paint and all of the seam sealer with a wire wheel and a sander from the entire engine bay, all of it. And then I welded all of the holes shut that I wanted to. I also welded in plates where the major holes were. I only left the one that's over here because on this side is where the intake is, so I wanted to make sure that I had like another port for airflow. And then once I was done welding everything, I used once I was done welding everything as well as sanding it down, I used the metal glaze to do the Bono job, which, it turned out pretty good here in the front, but some of the other areas are not great. I decided with paint that I was going to use spray paint because I was unwilling to buy a compressor for the purpose of just painting the car, especially since all the tools I had were electric anyway. I decided that I was going to use an epoxy primer because from what I had heard, if you use an epoxy primer, especially two-stage like the one I used, that it seals, and the metal etching ones don't seal as well. You have to apply another primer layer. So I used epoxy primer on the entire engine bay, and then I painted it with my one-stage paint, and then I used 2K gloss. And the paint job turned out really good for being a spray can paint job. There are a couple of areas where there are runs here and there that could be refinished in the future, but overall I'm happy with it. It's an engine bay at the end of the day. So with that, at that point I was like, okay, I'm gonna order some parts, and I planned some of that ahead of time before I could really pull the trigger. There's also the financial part where I can't just buy a car's worth of parts in one go. So I'm sure all of you guys realize that as well. And even if you're trying to get into working on project cars, it's a process. So for the cooling system on this car, I decided to go with Chase Bay radiator, the dual pass one, and then I ordered some of the hoses from Hybrid Racing. I had to modify them for a CRX because most of the kits that they have are for an EG or an EK. So I did that. I ordered the Chase Bay's spout as well, which is good because it allows you to plug in sensors right into the spout. And then I didn't want to opt for the thermostat from K-Tuned, so I just used the thermostat that is OEM to the car, and then did a fitting that has the thermostat or the actual sensors in it midway in the lower pipe. I also really wanted to make sure that I could keep the heater core. If you want to use a car for autocross, I would suggest that you really consult the rule book before putting a car together like this. The two most irritating things for this are that you have to have a full interior from the seats forward, including the heater core. They don't say anything about AC, and this car, to be honest, originally had AC but didn't come with it when we bought it. The car had been in a front-end collision. They just took the AC out. So there was no AC in this car, but that's not required for autocross because there was a CRX model that didn't have AC. However, every CRX has a heater and a heater core. So because of that, you're required to have a heater core. So I left the heater core in. Additionally, you're also required to maintain the front subframe. And you can modify the front subframe for it to actually fit the engine, which I had to do with some sledgehammer love to make it fit. But you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to buy parts and put things together. I originally even bought the relocation bracket for the alternator, and you just can't do that because the alternator will not fit down below where the subframe is. It won't. Most people use a traction bar, but with a traction bar, autocross rules make it difficult. Unless those rules have changed recently, from what I could tell, the subframe is a requirement. So with that, I had to make sure that I worked around the rules. And I wanted my heater core to be functional because having heat is nice.
Right.
So I made the cooling around maintaining the heater core elements from the CRX. And there was some like finagling that had to happen to make that work. But I made it work. Additionally, because I wanted this to be an autocross car, and because it was the DX instead of the SI, I wanted to do some significant work to the suspension on this car. A lot of people put rear disc brakes on these cars. The most common one is from a DA Integra, which I think is 90 to 93 Integra. But it increased the track width of the car. So I wanted to see what was available. Looked on eBay, they were really expensive, at least really expensive for me. I was looking around at junkyards that were in like, the Seattle and Spokane area, and I just so happened to be like, you know what, my dad lives in Denver, let me look and see if I can find a CRX at one of the junkyards there. And I happened to find a CRX SI at a junkyard in Aurora, and this was in the middle of the winter at this point. And in Aurora, it turns out, they had just gotten 6 inches of snow. There was a CRX there. The picture had both rear trailing arms, and I told my dad, I said, when your next day off, can you go pull these for me if they're there? And it turns out he's like, oh yeah, no. I think I messaged him on a Wednesday, and he went on a Friday to go look. Went out there on a Friday, laid on his back in the snow, pulled both of the rear trailing arms that were in great shape with discs, and he also pulled the e-brake cables because the e-brake cables for the CRX are shorter. So he pulled all of that. He ended up putting them in a box, and he got them out to me somehow. I don't remember exactly how it was. I just replaced everything. I'll be honest with you. I replaced the rear rotors, put in a set of Integra calipers because the 2000 Integra calipers fit, and they fit fine with the e-brake cable. And then in the front end, I put the fast brakes kit with the 4-piston wheel loads. Additionally, I got a new master cylinder, the 15/16 master cylinder from AutoZone, and you got to be careful. There's 2 different part numbers, so I made sure I got the part number that's 15/16. So beyond the brakes component as well as the rear trailing arms, additionally, I also bought a hard race kit that had tie rods as well as bushings. It took me 3 months to get it. However, I was able to get a hold of them eventually, so I replaced all of the bushings on this entire car. I knew the car was, 30 years old, so decided that it might as well just replace all the bushings because I had the capability to do so. In addition, I replaced all of the wheel bearings as well. That goes hand in hand with getting trailing arms off of a mystery junkyard car. Wanted to make sure that those wheel bearings were done, so I might as well just do the front ones, and I did. Additionally, I went with the older school setup for my coilovers. I went with a ground control set. I'd have to double check, but I believe that it's 600 in the front, 500 in the rear for these. So they're quite high compared to what they normally are. But again, for an autocross car, it needs to be high. And then for the ECU, I did a K-Pro setup. And I got lucky. I sent my K-Pro out to Honda, or sent my ECU out to Honda for my K-Pro setup 2 weeks before the EPA started messing around with some of these companies. And I did mine through K-Series parts, but they don't even do it anymore because they were under scrutiny for it. So I lucked out on being able to get K-Pro easily. In addition, I did a different fuel setup for this. I wasn't going to use the original fuel pump. It wouldn't have worked anyway. A lot of people use a Walbro 255, but I wanted to run an E85 in this car. And the Walbro, from what I've heard, can run E85, but they just don't advertise that it should. So I was like, it's just not worth it. I went ahead and got an AEM 340 LPH unit that's approved for using E85 methanol or whatever, and just put that into the tank. When I pulled the original tank, it was rusted, so I ordered a brand new OEM style tank and put that in. Additionally, I had to run it on a completely different fuel relay because otherwise it messes with the fuse box. So if you ever put in one of those fuel pumps in a CRX, know that the fuse box can't handle it. And it'll blow the alternator like solenoid fuse almost instantly. So I went ahead and did that. I've got the hybrid racing rail that you can see here. I did AN lines all the way around. as well as a stainless steel 10 micron filter. I had a really hard time finding one that was 10 microns, but they had one on Real Street, and Deutschwerks makes one, so if you're looking for one, know they have an option. And then I did Deutschwerks 550cc injectors. I know that's not very big for E85, but this car is NA. I had an exhaust put on the car. I knew that with this particular swap, you can run into issues with headers. There's only a few of them that fit. I can confirm 100% that the Skunk 2 Alpha header does fit, as I have one on this car, and I did not have to cut the subframe for it. I did a PLM high flow catalytic converter on this car, and I ordered a 3-inch kit from K-Teller. It took a while for them to get it to me, especially because I wanted stainless steel. And in addition, I ordered a vibrant muffler in the rear. I ordered a resonator, but it didn't fit, unfortunately. But I wanted it OEM routing. I don't want this car to look anything extra. I don't want it to be as loud as possible, especially with autocross rules. I don't want it to be loud. And if I ever try to track this car, I want it to be as quiet as possible. So I went ahead and did that. I had it TIG welded, paid the labor to have it done. The guy did a really good job, put V-bands in. It's really stable. It sounds really nice. Only other stuff that I haven't really mentioned about this car is the tuning and some of the other odds and ends. As far as the tuning goes, I had this tuned in downtown Denver by Steve Sampier. And he sent me a tune for E85 originally. Tried to start the car, and man, the car was running really bad. This was not his fault, mind you. The car was running really bad. Couldn't figure out why it was running really bad. I had a brand new cam in here, so I wanted to make sure I did cam braking, which is 25 or 15, 20 minutes at 2,500 RPMs. So I start this motor, get it running, get it up to 2,500 RPMs, and hold it there. Meanwhile, this thing's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. It's not running right. It's garbling, bubble, like making all kinds of backfire noises in the intake, doing all kinds of stuff it's not supposed to. It also made the exhaust like fire red. I cooked that thing. I was worried I was going to blow the motor trying to seat the cam. But it turns out we took the car down to Steve to have him do the original break-in dyno on this. And I was only getting gas 2 cylinders. So cleaned out the fuel system, was able to get it so that the injectors were cleaned out. So we went from 2 to 3, but we still couldn't get the 4th. And we couldn't figure it out. We did continuity between grounds from the ECU, did all kinds of stuff. We didn't have a annoyed light to check pulse, but we assumed there's no reason these injectors shouldn't work. We're getting signal from them, so why aren't they working? And with that in mind, I told him, it's got to be an ECU problem. Maybe I've just got a bad set of K-Pro. Maybe the original car was only running on 3. It'd be really hard to know because I didn't really slam the gas or anything, right? So I went ahead and ordered a Link ECU. Standalone, can do a lot more than the K-Pro can. It's 20 years newer in technology as well. It's mostly plug and play. This thing is all set up with Link. In addition, I put wheels and tires on here. The stock ones weren't going to cut it. They wouldn't have fit over the brakes anyway. So I went with some Oz wheels and then the RT 660s, which a lot of people use. Additionally, I got some other goodies from Hush Performance. And then we just got done with the break-in period. So I changed it to synthetic oil and I put some gauges in here. So I have AM gauges for coolant temperature because the one on the dash is just not very sensitive. I haven't been able to get it to really rise outside of parking it, and then you come back and the gauge is in the correct range between hot and cold. So I wanted something a little bit better than that. And then I've also got oil pressure and an AFR gauge as well. I want to also mention that this didn't happen overnight. I make it sound like I did all this in a short period of time. Hey, this is on YouTube, so it had to be 6 months, right? No, I did this through the end of my PhD and then some of it after my PhD. So I would say that at this point, the car is 2 years into the project. It has 800 miles on it. It's broken in. I use Brad Penn SAE 30 break-in oil. I think it's pretty good. I just wanted, to go that extra bit. In addition, there's some electrical problems that I need to solve. One of them being that the brake light is always on. I tried to trace it from the ECU to where it goes in the fuse box, but there are no issues there. I don't believe that there's an issue with the 2 safeties on the back of the master cylinder. I took apart the e-brake and looked at that. Don't think that's an issue either. However, the brakes themselves, there's a little bit of pedal travel before it actually gets hard, but once it's down at the bottom, it's pretty hard. I might have to work something out with that in the future or find some sort of fix for it because it's really annoying having the brake light on the entire time you drive it. So yeah, so that I mean that's the major issue right now. So far, it's not really leaking anything. The axles that I put in it were from Drive Shaft Shop, and they were meant to be swap axles. But if I turn the wheel all the way, I'll lose one of them, and I think it's just like a tad bit too short. I don't know if that's because the CRX was originally in an accident. From what I can tell, the frame rails are straight, but I've seen all kinds of posts online where some people say they're fine, some people say they're a little off, but it is what it is. As long as I don't go full lock, they're fine. So yeah, so those are the present issues. I want to make another video that covers the costs, what I actually spent. I actually did keep track of everything. That goes from the cost of all of the parts, all of the tools, as well as all the consumables. So it gives a really good idea of if you were to buy everything new and some things more than once, how much it actually costs to put one of these together. I find that a lot of the videos I've seen are pretty unrealistic with regards to how much it actually costs to build one of these. So in my next video, I want to talk about that, highlight some of the parts that I put on here and why, and if I could redo it, what I would redo if I could. I do want to encourage that if anybody has any questions or anybody that just happens upon this has any questions about the car, wants to know anything about what I've done, I'm more than happy to answer in the comments. I just want to say, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. And if you want to see more content, I'll post whenever I can.